So let's begin. I have shared the screen with you. Just a second. Okay, so I have got the screen with you, which says that making sense of the employment challenge. Now, what is this editorial talking about? And what is Balakrishnan? Now, he's an economist. So this editorial is written by an economist. And what is this Mr. Balakrishnan is talking about? And what is the employment challenge that we are facing? Now, by proposing that Indians work longer to achieve a larger national output, Mr. Narayan Murthy, the founder of India's iconic business house, Infosys, has issued something akin to a challenge to his compatriots. Now, just a minute. Okay. In particular, he proposed a 70-hour work week. So if you people remember, in past, I have done many editorials which have talked about the same content that Mr. Narayan Murthy has talked about. That means the youth should get involved, youth should come forward and should work 70 hours a week so that we could actually work towards a developing, or in order to make India a developed nation. So in past also we have covered many editorial. Let's see what is the viewpoint of Mr. Balakrishnan. So to strengthen his case, he has pointed out to the experience of Japan, Germany after the Second World War, when citizens worked longer hours than we do on average in India today. Now it is indeed correct that these countries had a miraculous rise in the 1950s, but is the comparison valid? Can Indians simply choose to work longer hours to replicate their experience? This is not obvious. So the economist, Mr. Balakrishnan, is saying that whatever Mr. Narayan Murthy has said, of working 70 hours a week, he's saying that he has pointed to the experience of Japan and Germany. Now, when there were crises after the Second World War, so what happened was that these countries, Japan and Germany, their citizens worked for long hours. Now, when the citizens worked, just a second. Now, when the citizens worked there for long hours, what was seen? Now, when citizens worked long hours than we do on average in India today, it is indeed correct that these countries had a miraculous rise in the 1950s. So the author is saying that post World War II, Japan and Germany, here the youth have worked tirelessly for longer hours, and when they worked for longer hours, so 1950s was the time which saw what, that there was a miraculous rise. That means the output was observed as high. Now, when the output was seen as high, can Indians simply choose to work longer hours to replicate their experience? This is not obvious. So, output, demand, and labor. Ever since the Keynesian revolution in economics, we know that output is determined by aggregate demand. So, the author is talking about the Keynesian revolution. And when the author is talking about the Keynesian revolution, he's saying that the output is determined by the aggregate demand. Now, which is the demand for the total value volume of goods and services produced in an economy? Now, the demand for labor is entirely dependent upon this demand. Now, what does that mean? See, your output uh, depends upon the aggregate demand. Now, the aggregate demand will ultimately govern the factor of demand of labor. That means if there is a higher demand in the market of a product, so what is going to happen is that because of this aggregate demand of the product in the market, the employer will go for what? He will increase the labor. And this is only possible if there is high demand in the market, which will eventually lead to rise in demand of labor. Now, there is no demand for labor independent of the demand for goods. Firms that employ more labor while aggregate demands has not increased will find themselves with unsold goods. That means, supposingly, if the aggregate demand in the market of the good that is being sold is very less, what is going to happen is that demand of labor is going to decline. And if you are ultimately going to increase the labor, what is going to happen? You will ultimately run into loss. So, an offer by the workers to work longer hours will not ensure that they will find employment so long as the firms are unwilling to hire them. So, the economist is saying that just because you are going for work longer hours, that doesn't goes with the fact that the employers are going to hire more. No, that's not the scenario. In fact, the scenario is that the demand of the product in the market should be high. So when this is going to be high, ultimately the working hours, the demand of the labor will increase. So the author is very practical with the viewpoint and is saying that instead of working or instead of talking about working longer hours, we should rather focus on the aggregate demand of the product in the market. What else is the author talking about? Now, firms are guided by the profit motive and will employ more laborers only if there is increased demand for their product. Unemployment reflects just that workers willing to work, but firms unwilling to employ them, for it would be unprofitable for them. Exactly, this is what is going to happen. If you see, this is your work. Now, laborers are willing to work. Now, even the laborers are willing to work, but what is happening is that the companies are not hiring them. What is going to happen? This is the reason for unemployment. That means the laborers are willing to work, they want to get employed, but the companies are not hiring. Why are the companies not hiring? Maybe because the demand of the product in the market is not there. Now the author is saying, if the scenario here is this, how would 70 hours a week work going to change the scenario? Fine. Now, the role of demand for goods and services in determining the demand for labor may be seen in the layoffs in the tech sector. That means, what is the person saying? That there has been high layoffs in the tech sector. How are you going to calculate this? That means all that layoffs that has taken place, there the youth was willing to work. Right? Now, globally, at the beginning of this year, since then, Google, Amazon have shed hundreds of employees hired during the COVID-19 pandemic when the demand for their product was high due to the lockdown or the work from home arrangement. In a variant of just-in-time strategy, whereby manufacturing firms are hesitant to hold an inventory of materials for long, software services companies, a segment of Mr. Narayan Murthy is no doubt familiar with, optimize the number of employees on the bench that is waiting to be deployed in production. So when there is unemployment, to exhort workers to work longer hours is somewhat irrelevant even when it is not meant to be callous. Now, what about Germany and Japan in the early post-war years? Actually, nothing demonstrates the role of the demand for labor services being a crucial demand of hours work than the history of these economies. So, since Mr. Balakrishnan is an economist, what is he trying to say is that no matter what is, no matter how many labor you are having or how many laborers you are going to hire, the ultimate crux is the ultimate trust is that what is the need of the economy. So everything boils out to the fact that the need of the economy is governing the aspects of what of the products. अब ये कैसे? See, what has the economist said? Now he has said that the demand of the labor service being crucial in being a crucial determinant of hours work than the history of the economies. Now the economist is saying that you need to note down or you need to read the history of the economies. That means how have they been performing or what is the factors based on which they are working. Histories of the economies. Now, their economies were pulverized by the relentless bombing during the Second World War. Now, these are your Germany and Japan. This is the economy that Mr. Balakrishnan is specifically talking about. Now, they had also experienced a decline in their workforce due to a great mortality. So, Mr. Balakrishnan is saying that during the Second World War, what happened was there was a very high mortality rate. When there was very high mortality rate, what was happening? Because of the high mortality rate, there was significant decline in the workforce. Now, when there was significant decline in the workforce, that led to what? Significant decline in the workforce. This led to what? Very less of people out present there to work in these economies. Now, due to greater mortality, both from combat and bombing. So this high mortality rate was because of combating. That means they were fighting to save their country, and another was bombing. If you remember, atomic bombs were thrown at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, so when it came to rebuilding these economies, the demand for labor was abnormally high. Minimally, prior to the resumption of production, the cities would have had to be cleared of rubble, a task requiring massive deployment of labor given the scale of devastation. Now, you can actually relate the similar scenario with Russia-Ukraine war crisis. You can also relate the similar scenario with Israel-Hamas issue or Israel-Hamas crisis. and Russia, Ukraine. Now, what is happening is that there's a large scale destruction that takes place. Now, when there's a large scale destruction taking place, what is going to happen? Now, there is all over what? A rubble that is being created. So, in order to clear this rubble, what is required is the deployment of people. So, see what is happening is they are saying that in order to regenerate your economy, you require people, no doubt about it. But what about the major devastation that has occurred because of the world wars? So, just because there was a major devastation, there was a lot of destruction that happened because of the world war. So, this led to what? A lot of what should I say, residues out there. So deployment of people were required in order to clear this rubble out. It is also necessary to keep in mind where the financial heft for the expansion of employment came from. In the case of West Germany, there was Marshall Plan by which the US has assisted the country's revival. So when it was Germany's revival that happened out of what? The Marshall Plan. And this Marshall Plan was of US. Now, if it had been insisted that the post-war recovery of Europe had to be confined to private enterprises, the revival would surely have taken far longer. In fact, it was out of an astute assessment of what private initiatives could have achieved in the context that the World Bank, funded by the Western government, was set up. So, you see, what is happening is that if you people have read the world history, or even if you have not read the world history but you have a little bit idea, so you'll find that all the major economies were involved in the world war. Now when these major economies were involved in the world war, they required what? Financial assistance to revive the economy. Now when they required this financial assistance, what was happening was that the Western governments created an institute. And what was that institute? The institute name was World Bank, and this was funded by the Western government. So the very high working hour clocked in the post-war economies of the mid-20th century is sui generis. And what is the author trying to say? That because of the large destruction that happened in the World War, the need of the hour, or you can say the demand during that situation, was very high working hours, and that was of its own kind. That means the author, Mr. Balakrishnan, is very much agreeing to the fact that after Second World War, people have worked for longer hours. He's saying this. They have worked for longer hours. Now, when they worked for longer hours, what happened was that was the demand of the situation, because that time the situation demanded the same thing from them. So, demand of the situation was working longer hours. Fine. Now, the case of South Korea, though it was not mentioned by Mr. Narayan Murthy, another economy that saw long working hours in this period was South Korea. So we have talked about Germany, we have talked about Japan. We are also now going to talk about South Korea. Some of its features are similar to those that had prevailed in Germany and Japan then. It too was recovering from a war, though a different one, and its resurgence was supported by considerable foreign aid received from US, of which it was an ally. So they are saying what? That the support was coming from US, which was an ally in the form of foreign aid. However, a political aspect beyond finance common to all these three countries is a strong nationalistic element that is likely to have accompanied their post-war reconstruction. It is not inconceivable that there was a voluntary support of effort to rebuild the nation after shared catastrophe imposed by the foreigners. So the author is saying that even if these long working hours were coming, it was because that people themselves were very much interested in reviving their own country. And since they themselves were acting, that means this reviving their own country or reviving their own economy was out of what? Out of their own personal interest. Now, there was an additional dimension in Korea. Though a dictatorship that saw the commanding of able-bodied men to work in the countryside on larger scale projects of preparing the land for raising agricultural productivity. Now, there's insufficient recognition of the fact that the manufacturing success of the East is underpinned by the prior success in agriculture. So, okay, so the first thing that they are saying is that the boost that started to come in, that was happening, how or was happening, why? Because, or how did it took place? So, it took place from the very important aspects of, or it began from agriculture. The high working hours that contributed to this are unlikely to have been witnessed in a system in which labor was allocated according to the consideration of profit. The case of working hours in Germany and East Asia in the middle of the last century, backed by public funding and cohesion, is not an experience helpful to understanding the present in India. A market economy where firms are driven by consideration of profit and cohesion is ruled out. Now, in the economic rise of the three countries mentioned, it was post-war reconstruction that provided the demand for greater output in the first instance. Longer work days had followed. So, the author is saying that firstly, the development or the scenario started happening from the unit of agriculture, and then they are saying what? That post-war reconstruction, they are saying that post-war reconstruction was demanded, and that provided the demand for greater output. That means, see all the kind of destruction that happened because of the World War. That mess need to be cleared out. So, in order to clear that mess, what was required was a long working hours. So, the output that was demanded. That means the output was demanded as reconstruction, and because reconstruction was something which was targeted, so the long working hours followed the output. It was not because we are, or you can say those three countries are all long working hours and then reconstruction happened. No, it was the other way around. Because the reconstruction of countries need to take place, or because there was a lot of destruction that happened. So, in order to reconstruct the countries, they demanded long working hours. So, just look at the statement. It is not talking about this way, rather, it's talking about that the reconstruction demanded longer working hours. Now, economic strategies for India. So the author is talking about the strategies of India. Now, does it mean then that there is an iron law of the market pinning us down helplessly to high unemployment through low aggregate demand in India? Not at all. Now, there are two strategies economic policy here can attempt. What is the first strategy? The first is to use the global market or world demand to grow the domestic economy. But India's good would have to be globally competitive. That means the first thing that the author is saying is to use the global market or the world demand to grow the domestic economy. That means, see, we live in a globalized era. That means the goods are globalized. Our goods are being sold in the world market. So what you need to do is that you need to take note of the world economy. You need to take note of what or the kind of the goods that are being demanded in the world market. And once you know about it, what is going to happen is now you should focus on your domestic economy, and India's goods should be made in a way where they are able to compete with the global goods. That means in a globalized market, what you are seeing is that each and every country is coming out with their own products. So what is that X factor in your product that is going to attract the consumers in the global arena? So that is what the author is saying, that you need to increase the competitiveness of your goods so that there would be high demand of our domestic goods. Now, here the experience of South Korea is relevant, as most of the produced input into production are available to all countries via trade. A country's competitiveness is ultimately determined by the productivity of its workforce and the physical infrastructure that complements labor. So, the strength and the dexterity of a workforce manifested as productivity is related to its health and skill. So, a very important factor that the author has said, that the productivity is related to what? The health and the skill of the worker. Now, in both these categories, India's workers are at disadvantage compared to the most successful economies of Asia. To have not brought its worker on a par with the rest has prevented India from using the world market to grow. A second route to greater output. That means this was the first one. You should, or we should, India should focus on our global competitiveness. That means the goods that we are being manufacturing and we are selling it out in the market. That should be of very premium quality. So that what is going to happen is that we are going to give the tough competition in the global world. Now, what is the second route that the author is talking about? The second route the author is talking about to greater output and employment is to expand the domestic market and thus aggregate demand. To see how this can be done, recognize that the economy produces both food and non-agricultural goods and services. Now, these are placed differently in relation to our consumption needs. If food can be produced at lower cost, the real income of the majority of Indian households would rise. They would now have to spend more on non-agricultural goods and services, having satisfied their needs for food. So now the author has given you a very, a very good solution. And what is the solution he's talking about? He's saying, see, firstly, there are two types of products that are sold in the market. One is your food. One is your non-agricultural goods. Now, if the food factor is satisfied, what is going to happen is that ultimately people will start focusing on the non-agricultural goods. So this would generate the demand needed to spur production in the rest of the economy. And with this, output will also grow, and in turn, employment with or without the longer hours in question. Now, in conclusion, it cannot be emphasized enough that Mr. Murthy's proposal that Indians work for 70 hours a week is surely meant for those in the formal sector, where specified work hours and a minimum wage stipulation exist. So, the author is of the opinion that longer working hour that Mr. Murthy has been talking about. In just a minute. and Mr. Modi is talking about is basically for the organized sector. Why? Because here you have a stipulated, wages. You have a minimum salary wages, and when you have this minimum salary wages, and you have a specified working hours. Ethnographic studies of India's informal sector show that in some of its segments, unorganized workers are already laboring this long at very low wages without any such protection. Here, the challenge is to activate the long arm of the law to ensure acceptable working conditions that encompasses fewer hours, higher wages, more equipment to lessen the physical burden of laboring. So the author is saying that what all in all, what is required is, see, the author is of the opinion that whatever Mr. Narayan Murthy has said, he has said it, or this can be applicable only to the organized sector where the people are having the stipulated wages and the working hour condition is specified to them, because in informal sector they are already unorganized labor that are working this long. That means they have been working at very low wages and for a very long time or very long hours. So the author is of the opinion that like what need to be done is that we need to bring in, we need to work on what, on the law that would provide acceptable working conditions and fewer hours, higher wages, fewer hours, higher wages, and more equipment to lessen the burden. So less of burdening of labor. Fine. Okay. So let's move on to the next article. Okay, so Bangladesh garment workers unrest. Now, this becomes very important with respect to your GS paper 3, and then this becomes very important with respect to optional paper also. So, Bangladesh garment workers unrest. Now, what is the article talking about? Now, since the last week of October, one of the Bangladesh's largest labor forces, the 4.4 million strong ready-made garment sectors, RMG, ready-made garment sector, workers are demanding a doubling of their legally mandated minimum wages from 8,000 Bangladeshi taka, or about $72 to 23,000 taka. Now, this is Bangladesh currency. Cashing on this unrest, the country's main opposition party began a 2-day general strike, demanding the resignation of the present PM over there. Now, what is the fast fashion significance of Bangladesh economy? So, how is Bangladesh economy running? So, Bangladesh is the world's second largest exporter of fast fashion or ready-made goods. So, Bangladesh is your world's second largest exporter. second largest exporter of fast fashion or ready-made goods after China, accounting for 85% of the country's export earning of $55 billion. Now it has a global market share of almost 8%. The ready-made goods sector main markets are US, UK, Europe, Canada, which H&M being the top importer. So, which country is the which brand is the top importer? It is your H&M. And who else are importing? So other big brands include Levi's and Zara. So Levi's goods and Zara. So these brands are importing these ready-made goods. The 4,000 old manufacturing facilities in the ready-made goods sectors are largely small and medium enterprises, mainly employing rural women, and has been credited with the helping the country's drastic reduction in poverty from 40% to 5%. That means because of this good industry, or you can say the garment sector, there has been a huge reduction in poverty. And this reduction is poverty happening from 44% to 5%. And this is based on international poverty line. Rising remittances by a growing immigrant population is the other factor contributing to government's foreign exchange. Now, why are ready-made goods sector workers protesting now? So it has been over 5 years since 2018 when Bangladesh Minimum Wage Board fixed a rate of BGT 8,000 for fast fashion sector workers, unlike a universal base wage. So, okay, a universal base wage was decided. Bangladesh follows a system of setting minimum wages for each sector of the economy. So, universal base wage for which sector? This is fast fashion sector. And there is a minimum wage for each sector. And this minimum wage is for each sector that has been decided by the Bangladesh economy. In the past 4 years, the country has witnessed steep inflation because of COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently the volatility in the oil prices fueled by the Russia-Ukraine war. The country's apex bank, the Bangladesh Bank, has pegged inflation of a 12-month monthly average at 9%, which is more than 2% point rise from 7%. So what is happening is that Bangladesh has witnessed inflation. And this inflation is because of what? Firstly, it is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second reason they are saying is that it is because of the high oil prices. And because of high oil prices, what is happening is that there's a huge rise in the oil price because of Russia-Ukraine war prices. And this, owing to all this, what is happening is Bangladesh Bank has pegged inflation to nearly, this was 9.37%, which is close to 9%. And initially it was 7%. That means it has shown a rise of 2%. Now, Garment Workers Union rejected a more than 50% raise in minimum wage proposed by the PM. They have stuck to their demand of nothing shorter of 23,000 BDT, which they proposed in April this year. Several economists, including the Bangladeshi Institutes of Labour Studies, peg a minimum monthly living wage at a BDT of 33,000 for garment workers. Moreover, Bangladesh foreign exchange reserves have more than halved from a high of $48 billion to less than $20 billion in the mid-October, according to the International Monetary Fund. That means, according to the reports of IMF, what they have said is that the Bangladesh foreign exchange reserves, that means the foreign exchange that Bangladesh is carrying, has halved. That means initially it was 48 billion. Now it has steamed to $20 billion. The PM has taken a strict austerity measures such as stifling imports of luxury goods. But the import curbs have also affected the functioning of the ready-made garment sector. The sector has cited price rise, import curbs, frequent power cuts as a reason for the inability to pay higher than what was proposed. Now, what role can brand importers? Just a minute. Okay. What role can brand importers play? That means I told you just now that the ready-made goods sector is where your these top brands are importing products from. And what are these? Like who are these top brands? That is your H&M, Levi's, Zara. So they are also importing goods from this ready-made garment sector. Now, big brands like Nike have faced intense criticism beginning in the 1990s for being responsible for driving down procurement costs and amassing super profits at the expense of workers' rights in the global south as they took advantage of neoliberalism. That means new liberalism. That is the race to the bottom approach of finding the cheapest source wherever available. See, this is what you people also do, that you want a product which is cheap and at the same time which lasts longer. So in the new kind of liberalism area, what happened was that these big importers were trying to do what? They were trying to get the products which costed them less or which was the cheapest. Now, these criticisms led to marginal changes like verifying work conditions, working hours, safety gears, wages, and sanitary conditions at global procurement facilities. But it did not lead to a meaningful contribution of sharing big brands' profits or investing in suppliers, small, medium enterprises infrastructure. This recent shift has been fueled more so by the global movements to decarbonize supply chains to tackle climate change. Now, the Berlin-based coalition of 19 garment brands and industry all global union called ACT, that is Action, Collaboration and Transformation, has pledged supporting a living wage in the ready-made and goods sectors in Bangladesh through promotion of the condition to achieve industry-wide collective bargaining. Now, a meaningful increase in the procurement cost will allow the majority of Bangladesh RMG small medium enterprises to tide over spiraling inflation and in no small measure help in buttressing their profit margin and increasing workers' wage. What is the relationship between the RMG, that means your ready-made goods sector, and the carbon emissions? Now, according to UNEP, that is United Nations Environment Programme, the fashion industry is responsible for anywhere between 2 to 8% of global greenhouse gas emission, making it one of the largest contributors to the climate and ecological crisis. That means, how come your fashion industry contributing to GHGs? In Bangladesh, the textile and the RMG sector combined constitute more than a quarter of country's total emission as on 2020. Now, according to the Green Climate Fund, a donor base of developing country to realize their decarbonization and climate resilience measures, Bangladesh ready-made goods facilities are not operating efficiently because of continuous usage of old and badly maintained machines coupled with poor energy management. That means the fashion industry is contributing to GHGs because of the poor machineries. Okay. Bangladesh has the maximum number of US Green Building Council certified RMG factories globally. So 202 facilities out of more than 4,000 is a good start. There is a still long way to go to track on to realize the country's 15% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2030. Now, while top global fashion brands recognize these gaps in financing, technology, governance, and the fragility of highly climate vulnerable economies like Bangladesh, their response to the ready-made goods sector crisis and decarbonizing their own supply chains at best would be described as wanting. So, what they are saying is that we need to take note of the fact that these global fashion brands recognize the gap of financing, technology, and governance, and the fragility of highly climate vulnerable economies. Now, what is at stake? The Prime Minister has been in power since 2008, making her the longest serving Prime Minister. Uh, Scores of opposition leaders have been incarcerated. About 200 named and 18,000 unnamed government workers have criminal cases filed against them. Police repression and counter violence has killed about 5 people. Now, what is the PM saying? The PM, her prospects will hang on how deftly she handles uh, the workers' grievance, the demand from the domestic ready-made garment sector, while also ensuring big brands deliver on their promises on procurement practices. The PM is also attempts to rein in inflation and fall in foreign exchange reserves. It would be no exaggeration to say that this would be one of the biggest tests in her political career. Why? Why would this be the biggest test in a political career? Because what she has to do is that firstly she has to make the point that the wages that is provided to the people in the RMG sector should be appropriate. Then the big banks that are importing or big banks that are importing products, these products are fulfilling the needs of the big banks and the big banks should fulfill the procurement price. Then the PM has to also take care of the climate resilience. Why? Because this climate resilience is can be achieved by checking the gaps in financing, by checking the gap in technology, and by checking the gap in the governance sector. Okay, fine, let's move on to the next. Okay, how free cancer care alone won't help to fight against the cancer. That means free cancer care is insufficient to fight against cancer in India. Now, by 2040, according to one estimate, 20 lakh people a year will be diagnosed with cancer in India. Cancer is already the third leading cause of death in India. In the coming years, it is expected to take over heart diseases and infection as well. The Indian health system has tried adjusting to these changing health needs, but there is one particularly pressing issue. The money spent by a patient on an element is highest for cancer. That means the expenditure that is happening is very high for cancer. Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojna has offered some respite by providing health insurance of rupees 5 lakh per family per year. However, despite this support, people are financially destroyed by cancer and its treatment. A June 2023 study reported that even among the patients availing Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojna, or other state health insurance coverage, cancer treatment rendered catastrophic health expenses in more than 80% and impoverishment of more than 60% of the people. Now, where do the expenses arise? The government provides free cancer care. These devastating costs arise in private sector. That means your out-of-pocket expenditure that is happening happening in the private sector. Now, ideally, once out-of-pocket expenditure for health should be zero. So, yesterday, if you remember, we talked about education as one of the public good. Today, the article is talking about the health, which says that the out-of-pocket expenditure for health should be zero. But the sheer burden of the diseases plus an underfunded public health system forces people to access care in the private healthcare system in India. This worsens the financial burden by adding the direct or indirect out-of-pocket expenditure. Direct medical out-of-pocket expenditure includes doctors' consultation fees. So that means your out-of-pocket expenditure is happening where firstly is your doctor's fees. That means when you go for first diagnosis, then is your cost of medicines, then is your medical test, then is your non-medical out-of-pocket expenditure that covers your transportation, who is the person you are staying with, so accommodation, food, and if you're going in very big tier 1 cities, then all kind of expenses are there since you are staying there. So indirect out-of-pocket expenditure accounts for the loss of productive hours and or income. So because you are there taking care of the respective person, or in case if you are the one. So what is happening is that since you are involved there, there's a time gap that has taken place. That means your income, your productivity for the work has eliminated. So your income, your productive hours are at stake. Now the blood investigations here take at least 10 days to be reported. This is a case study how a cancer patient is being treated. Now, what makes the fallout worse? Delays allow the disease to worsen, and they happen if patient have to struggle to get an early date for treatment. The earliest date for radiation therapy was available only after 6 months. We started the chemotherapy and are getting radiation therapy at a private center, which is costing 1.5 lakhs. And the financial fallout of cancer is worst when it affects the breadwinner of the family. That means the one who is earning. And see, if this is going to happen again, the out-of-pocket expenditure is going to exceed. Why? Because the productive working hours in going on treatment. Cancer diagnosis has a several impact on caregivers. That means some have lost job in Delhi, someone's wife has been treated, etc. Now, how high are the others' cost? Now they are again talking about other expenses that are, or you can say, the non-medical expenses that happen if the person is moving to a different city. That means your transportation, allocation, etc. All that allowances. Now, our government's helping. Borrowing money and selling assets have been identified to be a common strategy that disproportionately affect people from rural areas. Government have identified these issues in some part of the country. For example, 2012, the Haryana government made transport for patients with cancer and one caregiver in public buses from their places of residence. That means the government has given support. Support in what form? That means transportation was made free. Now, in 2017, Delhi launched the Arogya Kosh scheme to reduce the burden on public health centers and avoid the treatment delays. Here, residents of Delhi making less than 3 lakh a year are eligible to get certain tests like ultrasound, CT scans, and private health centers for free. Now, however, 93% of the people seeking care in government hospitals in Delhi were found to be unaware of the schemes. Now, what is the permanent solution? The most obvious solution to such post-cancer problem is to open publicly funded cancer care centers in every nook and corner of the India. Now, the author is saying that this should be done. That is, at every corner of the country, there should be free cancer centers. But what is going to happen is then again the burden on the government will increase, and we are already running on fiscal deficit. Then, if we are going for this, see, the solution is very positive, but the point is that this is going to increase the burden on the country, a financial burden on the country. Now, when the financial burden on the country is going to increase, we need to check onto the fact that how could this be achieved, where we are going to provide a good facility to the people, as like to the citizens, and not and also at the same time checking the financial burden of the country, which will ultimately rise, because if you're going for every nook and corner cancer center, this will be difficult. Now, of course, at this time, this sounds unrealistic and will require decades to implement. But the fact is that until the cancer care becomes as accessible as diabetes or hypertension care, we'll need to continue to provide financial support to those who are suffering. Free cancer care alone won't save our people from poverty. That means the expenditure is so high that it is shifting people to poverty. Fine. Okay, now let's move on to the next one. Okay. Just a minute. Virtues exist. Now, more finance needed to wean India's electricity grid of coal. Now, India has not done enough to demand more finance from more finance from the international community that would aid in transition towards greener energy. Now, the United Nations Conference of Party to be held in Dubai next month. Among the thorniest issues at COP negotiation is finance. Developed countries have yet to provide committed tranches worth millions of dollars to developing countries to mitigate greenhouse gases. That means the developed countries assisting the developing countries for what? To mitigate GHGs, to contain emission enough so that the globe does not heat up more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. The science says that by 2030, the carbon emissions need to be cut 43% of 2019 level. Now, however, the stated pledges by the government as of today will only see a 2% reduction in emission. India's most significant contribution towards this global effort is commitment to source nearly 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. However, the experts say that while installed clean energy was a laudable goal in itself, the greatest challenge to transition entirely to renewable energy was providing a peaking power, like when factors such as unusually hot summer or drought would result in large demand for electricity over a relatively short interval. Now, as of now, only coal can be reliable deliver on that. So all in all, what the article is talking about, the article is saying that firstly, the finance issue need to be checked out. Secondly, the source of energy, what we are thinking it to be, that is very much oriented with respect to the climate. Since whenever there are hot summers, the demand of electricity increase. Now, when the demand of the electricity increase, the only source that is left from where we can generate electricity is coal. Now, this would lead to what generation of electricity, which is not possible in the case of renewable source of energy. Now, we cannot have a situation of blackouts ensuring that our electric grid was capable of handling large loads. In 2023, what is the data being suggested by the Power Ministry? India installed capacity is 425 gigawatt. Other experts say that deliberation at Conference of Party 28 would see much of focus on global stock take. First ever formal reckoning of actual progress made by all countries in cutting emissions. That means the countries need to cut down their emissions so that the temperature target of reducing 1.5 degrees centigrade could be achieved. Now, while these numbers are broadly known, the larger purpose of the stock take is to push countries to declare more ambitious targets to have a shot at not breaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. This is just I have told you. Okay, so thank you so much. This one for today. I shall meet you tomorrow. Thank you so much.